I think the different sort of metaphysical implications in terms of those two. Because in English, don't you think the game and play have very different connotations about them? And especially, as you say, when you get into the notion of free play, which that all became, it's very different from thinking of it within us, within this kind of. We could go back to odd and even in the post story. That's part of the point in your post story too. That game there in terms of, it forces a rethinking. Very, very interesting.
And so what was before in game theory so precise, a precise modeling of a situation became completely sloppy.
Right.
It's just play.
Would game be the frame of reference for play?
Sorry,
Would game be the
more
frame
than
of
that.
reference for play? More than that.
Oh yes, it subsumes play, definitely. They exist at different levels. Yeah. The game would, encompass both players. Usually, you have two-player. You can multiply players, but then it depends on what kind of games you're in. Then the relationship is different. Von Neumann, for instance, would say, well, we can even think of an n-player game. So it's a mathematical problem. Yes.
Thank you again for your talk tonight, and I wanted to say again how much I enjoyed your manuscript as well. It seems like psychoanalysis has been and can become everything but psychoanalysis. I think if Freud could have seen the different directions in which psychoanalysis has been appropriated by different disciplines, I think it would have driven him a little wild. I guess my question, the first part of my question is that it seems like a lot of the Lacanian connections to information theory have everything to do with Freud after 1920. And Freud before 1920 is very hard to appropriate within that language. Compulsion to repeat, death drive, all that stuff fits in with this.
Right.
But as far as the therapeutics, which clinical psychoanalysis is completely based on, it doesn't really touch on that.
Right.
So I guess my question is, one, do you think there is that connection to be made? And two, what kind of therapeutic effects might this idea of the cybernetic unconscious have?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's Freud's later work that has been appropriated, rethought by Lacan in those terms, especially in the question of the symbolic order. Freud himself also, right around that time, began to appropriate certain biological theories. Freud was very interested in the theoretical developments in the various scientific disciplines, right? He was really following everything. So since you read the book manuscript, I have a discussion of how Freud appropriated entropy from the second law of thermodynamics. And entropy was the idea that Shannon also appropriated many years later after Freud to analyze informations. And therefore there's the question of how you think about energy versus information, and people debate about this. And entropy is really the key. If Freud had been alive in the Cold War, would he have thought of appropriating from it? I thought he would have, because he was, trying very hard to appropriate everything possible to, do his theory, right? The earlier stuff, is it possible? I don't know if Freud's earlier stuff is that easy to appropriate by people whose work has been influenced by information theory. Probably not that easy. Although, when did he write this? The one. Well, there's something else in which he talks about numbers, randomness of numbers. When was that written?
What about the discussion, the analogies he makes an interpretation of dreams to language in terms of syntax, basically
Right.
Syntax.
Right.
I mean, when I would teach the now you're showing the mistaken link between Lacanum linguistically, that would always be one place I would go to show sort of, is there are suggestions there, and then the way in which he understands various aspects of dream work, there are suggestions there about the unconscious being structured like a language.
Yeah.
You know?
So that part would be very difficult to reappropriate.
Right.
For instance, Lacan did not appropriate that. He basically dismisses semantics, syntax, linguistics.
It might be helpful just again to clarify what Shannon meant by information, so that when you're talking about a cybernetic unconscious in terms of information theory, to make clear what you're not talking about in a different language. So just just sort of give a brief indication of what he meant by information.
Shannon says information has nothing to do with semantics, with meaning. It is about probability. It's very easy to understand, except when you get into complex system, you really need to get to the nuts and bolts of mathematics. If there is only one message in the world, then there is no information in the sense that the receiving end would have known. If there were two messages, then the probability is 50-50. The receiving end would know either this or that. If there were four messages, so it's just going on. So it's a mathematical problem. Information is connected with entropy and redundancy. This is Shannon's idea. Okay, redundancy indicates a certain pattern in the message sent, whereas entropy means a certain level of disorder, large amount of information. That is, you have to really pick, right, the probability you can actually calculate. Shannon did a very interesting analysis of English words, not as units of meaning, but as units of probability. So he turns English into a statistical construct. For instance, we all know, although we don't really reflect on it, the letter T being followed by H is very probable. Right?
So low information.
Low information, yeah. And then, but there are combinations which are highly improbable. For instance, the kind of experiment that James Joyce did in Finnegan's Wake, which I analyzed. In Finnegan's Wake, if you're familiar with it, the first page gives you a 100-letter sequence, no breaking, no spacing in the middle. It is not a word, but it is a letter sequence. And this interested Shannon. So we analyzed Finnegan's Wake. That's how I connect them, because Shannon read Finnegan's Wake, and mathematicians were very interested in literary works, but they read them very differently from how we approach them. And so if you take information, you read Joyce Finnegan's Wake, which is almost an unreadable book, then from this perspective, it's quite interesting to see how Joyce plays with letter combinations that generate all kinds of things, right? So in that sense, to answer the question, information, even when it's applied to words and sentences, it is not about meaning, it is about probability. And Bell Lab scientists did all kinds of experiments with this random production of poetry. And they actually had some outputs. And I found some of the poems that they generated by using this method. For instance, you open a book and you pick out randomly two words side by side. And then you flip the pages, just any page, and then you look for the second appearance of the second word. And then you just flip the pages. You find the word next to it, and you write it down. And then you look further. And then that's how you generate, machine generates probable English sentences. This is the origin of the death of the author. That's my argument. The death of the author is in the machine.
Yeah, maybe not totally dead. Because in that clip that you showed, it's fascinating in two senses.